Hi team, today we'll be looking at topic 1.3 in your essentials book, which would be aerobic and anaerobic energy systems, and in particular we'll be taking a greater look at the three energy systems. Now hopefully you would have covered a bit of this last year in stage 1 phys ed, but that's okay, it still makes up a key component of the stage 2 physical education requirements. So to begin with, we'll look at our three energy systems. Now our first energy system is the creatine phosphate system, also known as the ATP-CP system. Now it produces energy for short explosive bursts, enough energy for 10 to 15 seconds. Very rapid, used for low duration, high intensity. The reason this energy system is so short in its duration is because it relies on stored energy. You can imagine if we just relied on our body producing energy for us to be able to exercise, when we come into a situation where we might be in danger, let's say we're at the ATM getting some money out and someone comes along with a gun, if we don't have any stored energy in our system, our body has to make energy. So this guy's holding a gun to us and all of a sudden we go, "Excuse me sir, can you just hold up? I've just got to produce a bit of energy before I can run away." So it's a flight or fight response. So our body has stored energy, but our body doesn't want to store a lot of it. So that's why this first system is so short. As it says, 10 to 15 seconds, very rapid, okay? Used for low duration, high intensity. So examples being sprinting. So a 100-metre sprint would be an example of a system that would rely heavily on this energy system. Okay, so that's our first system. Now our second system, the lactic acid system. Before we get into that, one of the most important things you need to be aware of is that these systems aren't start-stop. In other words, the first one doesn't start, finish, and then the next one starts. They are all running. It's just a matter of which one is the most dominant. Now, dominant is a key word that you would have to incorporate in your language. So the first system might be dominant, and then the second system is dominant. So they overlap. They are all existing. So second system is termed lactic acid. Now it's termed that the lactic acid system, as it says there, because one of its byproducts is lactic acid. Now byproduct is something that is made as a result of the process. So for example, a byproduct of making beer is water. So that's why you can go down to the West End Brewery on Port Road, pay $1 and fill up all your water bottles, because they've got an excess of water because it's a byproduct of the process of making beer. So this particular energy system, in other words, when we're using this system, byproduct is lactic acid. Now we know lactic acid can actually stop us from exercising. Produces energy for longer exercise sessions and enough energy to maintain exercise from 10 to 15 seconds through to 2 to 3 minutes. Now that time period is dependent upon the intensity. Okay, and we'll go into that a little bit later on. Third system is the aerobic. Now we can have aerobic or anaerobic. Now aerobic means simply with oxygen. So in other words, this system is operating with oxygen. The previous two systems, what we term anaerobic. And anaerobic means they are working without oxygen. So an easy way to think about it would be, hey, could I hold my breath and complete the task? So for example, a 100-metre sprint is anaerobic. Could I hold my breath and sprint 100 metres? Absolutely you could. Aerobic, as it suggests down the bottom of the slide here, used for endurance activities with longer durations. So would you be able to hold your breath and complete the 1500? No. Suggesting it is aerobic. So the aerobic system will be used for bouts of exercise lasting 3 minutes or more roughly. Unlimited supply of energy at submax. Now submax is another key term you would have to use. Submax meaning below max. So the body is always producing energy. Lactic acid buildup is what stops us. So we've got these three systems. So we've got our creatine phosphate or our ATP-CP system. We've got our lactic acid system and we've got our aerobic system. So let's say we're going for just a nice submax jog for 1500 metres around the oval. 1500 metre jog. We start exercising, we start in this system. In other words, we've gone from standing still at the start line to running. So the first roughly 10, 12, 15 seconds, this system would be dominant, the creatine phosphate system. At about the 10 to 12 second mark, the lactic acid system would then kick in and go, hang on, we're exercising. We've already used all that stored energy that we had for 10 seconds. I've got to start making more. So the lactic acid system would become dominant. So the lactic acid system would kick in about the 10, 12, 15 second mark. Now that would become the dominant system. Through to probably about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And at that point, your body makes a decision and goes, hey, can I keep this up or do I need to stop? Now at the sub-max pace, your body's going to go, yeah, about 2 minutes. We're comfortable with that. We kick into the third system. The third system becomes dominant. So you can see, if we're just jogging around the oval, there is a point when each system would be dominant. But all systems are always being used. So we're going to look at a little bit more detail how these systems actually give us our energy. Now, this word here, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. If you like, that's our energy. That's what lets us actually go. Now, there are small amounts of ATP stored in the body. Okay? They're stored in the muscle. And what this first system does is it takes those stored energies and it uses it. As we spoke about, a bit of stored energy. If we have a look at a diagram here, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now triphosphate, tri means 3. Tricycle has 3 wheels. So in other words, there are 3 phosphate molecules. So our body takes them out of the muscles where it's stored and goes, I need to use that. And in the process of using it, it loses a phosphate molecule. So we had 3, we've lost 1. What does it become? Simple math says 2, adenosine diphosphate. So what needs to happen is that needs to be resynthesized, or if you like, recycled into ATP. So our creatine phosphate donates a molecule. So we've now got a phosphate that's come in. There's 2 down here. They join up to make 3, and we're ready to go again. But the question you might be asking is, okay, how long does that process take? Well, about 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, we will see 100% replenishment of that ATP. So in other words, I could sprint 100 metres in the process, I'd lose that. I could wait 3 minutes, this cycle would then happen, and I'd be right to go again. And in theory, if I did that all day, sprint 100, wait 3 minutes, go again. Sprint 100, wait 3 minutes, go again. I could pretty well do that all day because this is being, if you like, replenished or recycled. As we said, about 3 minutes for 100% replenishment. Okay? Next system we look at is our lactic acid system. It involves the breakdown of carbs. Now it's going to use carbs because carbs requires less oxygen to break down. And remember, is lactic acid aerobic or anaerobic? The lactic acid system is an anaerobic pathway. So in other words, it's operating without oxygen. So if we don't have oxygen, we need to burn carbs because carbs requires less oxygen for us to break down. Okay? So it takes the carbs and it breaks it down. Now, the body will either break it down into glucose, which we can use straight away, or it'll store it as glycogen. So if we're sitting on the couch and we've got our carbs being broken down, since we're not doing anything sitting on the couch, our body will take that glucose, convert it into glycogen, store it in the muscles and liver. So that when we start exercising, our body can go, hang on, I've got this glycogen in my muscles, got it in my liver, let's pull it out, convert it back into glucose, and then it can be used. So how the lactic acid system works. I said we've got that glycogen that's either stored, we convert it into glucose. Now glucose is then broken down into a substance called pyruvic acid. Now pyruvic acid, in the process of making that, we produce 2 ATP. In other words, 2 units of energy. If we just dial back a couple of slides, how many have we got here? Just the one. Only 1 ATP. So this system's only using the 1 ATP. This one creates 2. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. See, if I've lost you, you might want to pay attention. If there is insufficient oxygen, so insufficient, not enough oxygen, in other words, working above steady state, so you're working quite hard, what happens is your body goes, hey, I've got this pyruvic acid, have I got any spare oxygen to mix with it? If your body says no, because we're working too hard, in other words, you think working 90% above your heart rate, your body's going to go, hang on, all the oxygen we've got is actually going to the working muscles. I've got nothing left to mix with this. And what that sends a message to your body is saying, hey, we're working way too hard. I've got nothing to mix with this pyruvic acid. Therefore, it's going to turn into lactic acid. And what's going to happen? You're going to stop. Whereas, if you're just jogging, suddenly your body goes, hang on, I've got this. Do we have any spare oxygen? Your body's going to go, yeah, we're only submax. I've got plenty of spare oxygen. So what your body does is go, okay, well, if you give me some oxygen to mix with this pyruvic acid, all right, we can prevent it from turning into lactic acid. And this is how the third energy system is initiated. So at this point right here, pyruvic acid, that's the point where your body decides, are we going to initiate the next energy system or are we going to end here? So you imagine the 1500. There's always one little kid that decides to sprint the 1500. He gets to this point where the pyruvic acid is created. He gets there about 60 to 90 seconds into the race. And his body's going, have you got any spare oxygen for me? And his body's going, nah, you're going way too hard, mate. So what happens? Turns to lactic acid and he stops. Whereas that kid that jogs the 1500, his body gets to this same point at about 90 seconds or 120 seconds, 2 minutes in, and it goes, have we got spare oxygen? Yep, we got spare oxygen. Let's combine it with that, and then it moves into the next system. So you can see this is very similar to this. Starts off exactly the same, but instead we had enough oxygen to mix with that, and it initiates what's known as the Krebs cycle. Now, in the process of the Krebs cycle, there are a few byproducts. CO2, which is carbon dioxide. And how is that created when we exercise? We breathe out. H2O, how is that generated when we exercise? We sweat it out. And what else do we produce? 36 ATP. Now there was 2 produced up here. So all up, this aerobic system is producing 38 ATP. So this produces 38. This one, the lactic acid system, produces 2, and this one only produces the 1. So which system would we prefer to use? Probably the aerobic system, because it's going to generate the most energy for us. Okay, so that's our energy systems. Now, this is what we need to be able to do, and probably need to be able to do in our sleep. We need to work out which system would be most dominant for some of these sports. Now, some of them would be very easy. For example, the 100-metre sprint. We need to say, okay, well, what contribution would be made by the CP system, the lactic system, and the aerobic? Now, remember, you can't have 0 for any of these because they are all contributing at some point. But the 100-metre sprint, how long would it take to sprint 100 metres? If you've thought roughly about 10 seconds, you're pretty well spot on. Now 10 seconds suggests short duration, high intensity. Which of these 3 systems does that sound like? Whoop, let's go back a slide. It would be the CP system. So we're going to think 10 seconds, high intensity, majority of it's going to come from this one. Why would the lactic acid system contribute in a 10-second sprint? Because it would start to kick in. Aerobic, why would that contribute? Hey, standing at the start line waiting, or as soon as we've finished and our body goes into recovery. So if we're looking at the 100%, what's going to be the breakdown here? Probably 90% would be the CP system. Right? Maybe about 3-4% for the lactic acid system. And then we'd be looking at 6 or 7% for the aerobic. But it would all be used at some point. The other thing we need to be able to do is look at okay, let's say we speak about an AFL midfielder. Which system would be the most dominant? Now we could easily go a game of footy, 30-minute quarters, goes for 2 hours. 2 hours suggests, hey, the aerobic system. Now it's not a bad thought, but what we actually need to do is break down, what does that midfielder do? How often in a game of football would a midfielder run continuously for 90 seconds or more? And the answer is not very many. Then you can go, okay, how many times would a midfielder be standing around? Now, standing around would be which energy system? Standing sounds submax, right? Sounds aerobic. So, standing around, waiting for a ball up, waiting for a boundary throw in, waiting for the full forward to kick a goal. All right? Sitting on the bench, recovery. Sitting on the bench and recovery is the aerobic system. Right? You're sitting here listening to me babble on at the moment. That is very much, you're in the aerobic system. You're working sub-max. So all of a sudden we start going, there is actually a fair bit of aerobic to the midfielder. But what about when they're actually moving? Which system would it be? Well, we have a look at what do? How often or how far would they actually sprint for? And the longest they might actually sprint for might only be 20 metres. To make a lead, to chase an opponent because they've got the ball and they're running away. 20 metres. So not very long. Would it be high intensity? Yes, they're sprinting. So suddenly we've got some high intensity, short durations, which suggest the CP system. Now how long does that need to recover? We go for a sprint, 3 minutes. So if we're going to get a 3-minute rest, that's fine. But how often in a game of footy would we get a 3-minute rest other than sitting on the bench? Not too often. So if we're using a lot of high intensity repeated efforts, suddenly it becomes the lactic acid system. So we start to break this down and go, okay, well, maybe about 20% of the time would be the CP system. Maybe about 40 to 50% would probably be the lactic acid system. Not because we're running for a minute at a time, but because we've got a lot of high intensity repeated efforts. That generally suggests the lactic acid system. And the aerobic, might be around that 30 to 40%. So that's the game that we need to be able to play, is we need to actually break down the position and look at what it is they're actually doing. How long do the duration of the intensities go for? What intensity? How much recovery time do they get? And that way we can start to work out which energy system is going to be most dominant at different points in time. Okay? So an AFL midfielder would be dominant in the CP system. Let's say there's a ball up. They grab the ball out of the middle, they sprint 10 metres and kick it to the full forward. That's when that one would be dominant. When would the lactic acid system be dominant? They might chase their opponent down the field for 20 metres, lay a tackle, pick up the ball, kick it to a teammate in the middle of the field, run past, get the ball passed again, and then kick to the full forward. You can see how, since there's a repeated effort of chasing down an opponent, running forward again, those high intensity repeated efforts would have the lactic dominant. And when would the aerobic be dominant? He's hit the full forward on the chest, full forward's going back to have a goal, set shot. What's the midfielder doing? Standing there, recovering. That's when that system would be dominant. Suddenly, we've got the interplay of energy systems all sorted. So your challenge now is, based on those sports, try and break them down. What do you think the percentage would be for each of those sports? Good luck. Until next time, we'll see you.